Welcome to Jackie's 20th podcast, March 15th, 2025, and we're rolling.
Hello, my name is Jackie Garinger McDermott, and we're recording live from the English Valley History Center in North English, Iowa. This diary or journal was written by my great-great-aunt, Mary Elizabeth Claypool Wade, who was known as Libby Wade. Here's a picture of Libby. She was my grandmother's aunt and the matriarch of our very, very large family. Libby lived a half a block east of Main Street in a little house on Oak Street in North English, Iowa, until near the end of her life in 1959. Guys, front door. She was 71 years old in 1946. I don't remember her, but she knew me as a baby. Downtown North English was also the center of my life as I grew up. I would like to introduce you page by page to the cast of characters from North English, Iowa, and the surrounding English Valleys area. August 16th, 1946. Hot today. Carried some potatoes and cans to the cellar. Had perch for dinner. Mr. Cray came home on the train. Russell saw him at the station. Robert Wilkerson had a pet coon uptown. John Cray was the father of Libby's son-in-law, Richard Cray. North English had regular passenger train service in 1946. Russell is Libby's 38-year-old son, who is nicknamed Tyler Wade, and he lives with her. Robert Wilkerson would have been Butch Wilkerson, age 8. It would make sense that he would have had a pet coon because his father was very much an outdoorsman. Here's a picture of the Wilkerson family with Butch down here in the corner, right there. And we'll do more on the Wilkerson family at another time. August 17th, 1946. Phyllis is 15 today. Myrtle died on the day Phyllis was born. A big rain today, wind and lightning last week. Lila Cobb, Viola Ballard, and Lynn Dean were here. Lynn Dean will be 2 years old in October. Mrs. Hardy is quite poorly. Lila is taking care of her. Mamie and Glenn moved to the little Stover house today. We are going to Louise's tonight. Phyllis is right here in this picture. She is the teenage daughter of Warren or Mike Wade and his wife, Lena. I met Phyllis later in life when she returned to North English to live. Right here on this side is Sarah Myrtle Claypool Mall, Libby's older sister. Little Beth, her daughter, is right beside her, and we talk about Beth in the diaries quite often. Lila Cobb was the mother of Libby's grandson-in-law, Glenn Cobb. And Viola, or Mickey Ballard, this is a picture of them right there, on where my finger's at, top finger. Mickey Ballard was Lila's daughter, and Lynn Dean Ballard, who was 2 years old at the time, was Mickey's young son. My faithful listener, Louise Davis, is the daughter of Ralph and Mickey Ballard also. Mrs. Hardy was Lila's mother. Her maiden name was Mary Emily or Emma Long. Thanks to my new friend and listener, Chris Carter from the East Coast, for this clipping of Peter and Emma Hardy, his great-grandparents. And they were also the great-grandparents of Gary Carter, Rick Carter, and my faithful listener, Steve Carter, from the class of 1969. Glenn, or Spark, was my Uncle Glenn Garinger, and Mamie was his wife. Glenn was the son of Bertha Garinger, so he was the great-nephew of Libby. They were newly married and had moved to their own home. Louise Claypool Long and her husband, John Long, lived in Vinton. Russell and Libby went up to stay the night with her niece and family. Louise Long was my great-aunt. I learned the rest of the story from the newspaper that they had stayed all night. August 18th, 1946. Russell's 39th birthday. Alonzo Geringer's 23rd birthday. Saw Shorty, Delbert Long, and Garrison last night. Went to Louise's and from there to CR to the Blair reunion in Ellis Park. Had a nice time. Bert and Lizzie Avard rode home with us. Mrs. Hardy also from Marengo. Alonzo Geringer was my Uncle Al Geringer. He is in the middle and the back in that picture. Up there. Louise's husband, John Long, right there, was the son of George Long and Mary Adeline Blair, who was the daughter of Rachel Tennessee Blair, originally from the Inkletown area. So Libby knew all these people for years when she lived out in the Green Valley area. Lizzie Avard was a Blair also. And Mrs. Emma Long that I talked about Emma Long, that was Mrs. Peter Hardy, she was John Long's aunt. All these people attended the Blair reunion in Ellis Park in Cedar Rapids. From a newspaper clipping, I learned that there were over 100 people at the Blair reunion, but only one couple from Kansas whose last name was actually Blair. August 19th, 1946, Beth's 38th birthday. I washed in the morning. Amy Fawcett was here. She and Maud are going to start to Pennsylvania tomorrow. I tried to call Beth, but didn't get through. Beth Mall Holmes is Libby's youngest niece, the daughter of her sister Myrtle Claypool Mall, and her husband John Josiah J.J. Mall. Telephone service in those days was on party lines, which meant that lines were shared, so calls could not always be completed. Amy Foster Fawcett was the sister of Maud Foster Claypool, Libby's friend and niece by marriage to her nephew Ray Claypool. They were going to Amy's home in Pennsylvania for 2 weeks, according to the North English Record that week. Since it is Monday, Libby is doing her wash. August 20th, 1946. Did part of the ironing in the AM. Mary R. here, also Bertha. Just after dinner, Jaunty came. Looks real well. Maud and Amy started on their trip. F.E.B. Miles took secret work in the p.m., finished ironing in the evening. Since it is Tuesday and all the wash is very wrinkly in the days before fabric softener and tumble dryers, Libby is doing her ironing. I am old enough to remember some of those ironing days. Mary Regseger, and she's the younger one on the left here, was Libby's friend from way back in the Green Valley days. Bertha Geringer was my paternal grandmother, and there's a picture of her there. She was Libby's niece. Jaunty Claypool was from Brooklyn. There's his picture right there. He was my grandma's older brother, so he was Libby's nephew, and he was named after her father, Libby's father, Jonathan Claypool. And Jonathan Claypool's right there in this picture of the three brothers that came to Iowa, Jonathan, Samuel, and William Claypool. Jaunty was the grandfather of my cousin Johanna Claypool Wigley from California, and she plans to come here in the next October and bring her sister Annette from Arizona, and they're going to come visit me. I'm quite excited to see them. Jaunty was married to Viola Tippy Claypool later in life, who was the grandmother of the Tippies from North English. F.E.B. Miles was the noble grand, or the leader of Libby's Rebecca group, and she gave her some lodge work or secret work to do. F.E.B. Miles was the widow of a doctor from Philadelphia and a former teacher who had moved to North English to take care of her aunt, Anna Leslie. August 21st, 1946. Cloudy and rain some in the a.m. Mrs. Bolt's here. Hattie in the p.m. Her uncle is not doing so well. Expect to bring him to Mrs. Newberry's soon. Mary R. called and said she had some tomatoes for us. Russell went after supper and got them. Miss Janet Wilkins here. I was alone in the evening. Mrs. Elizabeth Geiger Bowles was Libby's elderly friend. She was the aunt of Dr. U.S. Geiger, who lived in the big house across the street on the corner from Libby. That house has been torn down now, and it's what we call the bank parking lot across the street from here. Hattie Newberry Killian was her 55-year-old neighbor and friend who lived with her elderly mother, Clara Harper Newberry. And there's Clara on this side. And the family learned last week that Clyde Harper has cancer. And Clyde's on this side in this picture. August 22nd, 1946. Cool. I canned 11 quarts of tomatoes. Lena and Judith and Jenny were here in the AM. Someone moved into a room at Newberry's. I think it was one of the teachers. Clifford Yoder moved today to near Muscatine. They used Wayne's truck. I don't know who drove it. Lena Wade is Libby's daughter-in-law and the wife of her son Warren or Mike Wade. Judy is her 5-year-old granddaughter, Libby's 5-year-old granddaughter. Jenny is the wife of Wayne Wade, Libby's oldest son. When people could not afford to rent or buy a house in those days, they often rented a room from someone else. The Newberrys were Libby's neighbors. Libby's son, Wayne or Perky Wade, and he's with Jenny in this picture, he was a businessman who owned small trucks to haul grain and shell corn, etc. Wayne has drivers who work for him and drive for him and also do physical manual labor for him. Wayne uses those trucks to move people and other items around the Midwest. Recently, he moved Don Holland family back to North English, for example. Libby doesn't talk much about Wayne's businesses, but the newspaper charts Wayne's adventures. August 23rd, 1946. Cool again this morning. Russell went to Cedar Rapids. Hattie said they are bringing her uncle there today. The new teacher's name is Harnick. She and her son moved in yesterday. Neva and DM were here. Johnette has whooping cough. Russell took Harold and Beth and Bon and Jean and wife back to Kyoto. Libby's friend is Hattie Newberry. Her uncle Clyde Harper is seriously ill with cancer and they are bringing him to his sister's house. Neva Cray, who was later Neva Burdine and lived in the little greenhouse on Boland Avenue, at that time was a young mother. And her daughter, Dorothy Marie, that Libby calls DM, this is a picture of her. She was a teenager. And her younger daughter, who was 9 years old at the time, was Johnette, who later married Tom Hudson and had several children and lived in Keswick. Libby's niece Beth and her husband Harold Holmes had one son, Von Holmes. Jean Mall was related to Beth. They all lived in Kyoto. August 24th, 1946. Hazel's birthday. Francis Herrick's sale. May Bear here, said secret work. Jenny brought the mail, a letter from Anna and one from Louise. Mary R. was here, also Mrs. Bolts and Bertha. Russell not home for dinner, cold enough for a fire, was 62 degrees at noon. Sadie Wetherill was here. Hazel Wade Cobb is Libby's married granddaughter. I found the ad for Frances Herrick's sale. She said she was moving to Oregon. What I found remarkable was that she had so few possessions for sale. For example, a couch and a couple chairs and a couple beds was about it, and a few other possessions. People in those days made do with much, much less than we do today. Maybear was in lodge with Libby. Secret work, I'm still not sure exactly what they meant by that. I think it might have been memorizing stuff. Libby writes regularly to her married daughter Anna in Texas and her niece Louise Long, that we just said lived at Vinton. Sadie Wetherill was the mother of Ruth McCarter from North English. Sunday, August 25th, 1946. Wayne's 45th birthday. Heard that Mrs. Gary Brown died last night. She was only sick for an hour or two. I was alone most of the day. Russell went to the river in the PM, got several nice carp. Mr. Warner was with him. Waynes are all at the fair. Justine Brown was the wife of Gary Brown, the school janitor, and the mother of Mace Brown, the Major League Baseball player. And also J.C. and Vaughn, who died in the flu epidemic, and Rex Brown and Lena Brown Warner, who was the grandmother to Carolyn Warner Elwood of the History Center, and others were her other two children. Ellison Barnes, or E.B. Warner, was Russell's boss and the friend and grandfather of my friends Mary Warner Coonert and Betsy Warner Pilkington. And several of Wayne's family members went to the Iowa State Fair in Des Moines, and I found the newspaper article on that. According to the newspaper, those attending were Mrs. Wayne Wade, Jenny, and Harold or Stub Wade, and Walter and Frida Wade, or Bud. Wayne went to Mexico, Missouri on business. I believe Hazel and Glenn Cobb also attended. August 26, 1946. Washed in the morning. Sadie Wetherill came and we went down to Brown's in the p.m. Mace flew from Boston to Des Moines. I'm awful tired. I had a letter from Anna. Arlen had his tonsils out and Mylan's strep is better. It was a custom in those days to take a hot dish or a salad or a dessert, etc., and gather in the home of a family who had lost a member, so that they would not have to cook for the family themselves and to console the bereaved family. So Libby and her friend Sadie Wetherill went down to the Gary and Justine Brown home. Arlen Cray is Libby's grandson. It was in Texas. He was 16 at the time. And Mylan Richard was just discharged from the Navy. August 27th, 1946. Cool except in the sun. Russell went to Cedar Rapids. I went to Mrs. Brown's funeral and then to booster class picnic dinner. Alice Van Auken said the secret work after I came home. Chris and Ora MD brought me home. Judd Geiger moved in at Newberry's. The Newberrys were known to rent rooms to those in need. My mother, Etheldean Keller Geringer, roomed at the home of Hattie Newberry Killian in the early 1950s when she worked at the English Valley's Creamery and her parents lived out in the country. August 28th, 1946. Canned tomatoes. Leela Arthur called in the p.m. Had a nice visit. Verdi was here. Doris Reese came and gave secret work. Jenny here later. She brought me a brooch from the state fair. Wayne and Shorty took Russell's car and went to Cedar Rapids. Russell went to the state fair with Mildred, Mary Wagner, Himmler, and a lady friend. Ina sent me a peck of tomatoes. Bertie McKinstry was Lena's best buddy. Leela Arthur was a friend from town who was in Rebecca Lodge with Libby. Doris Roller Reese was in Lodge with Libby and was my history teacher in junior high. She's maybe the reason I love Iowa history. Libby's middle son, Warren or Mike Wade, and his friend Roy or Shorty Harris had borrowed Russell's car, especially since Russell had other plans with friends to go to the state fair. I found an ad where Mike Wade and Shorty Harris had gone into business together after buying a portable feed mill from George Kincaid that year. Shorty Harris was the grandfather of my Geringer cousins in Texas, David, Kim, and Carrie Geringer. Mildred Reese was Russell's longtime girlfriend. Ina McKinstry Claypool is the elderly widow of Libby's cousin, Wallace Claypool, and she lives across the block, and evidently she has a large garden. August 29th, 1946. Temperature in Des Moines, 39 degrees. Freezing temperatures in Wisconsin this morning. Canned some more tomatoes. Russell went to Cedar Rapids. Billy O'Brien stopped in a minute. He and his bride are at his mother's. Mary R. was here in the p.m. Libby gets her news from the radio, and that's where she's finding out all the temperatures. Russell drives for the Home Lumber Company. Mr. and Mrs. William O'Brien, according to the newspaper, came the first of the week from Seattle, Washington. Bill has been discharged from the Navy and hopes to go to school this fall. August 30th, 1946. Carried tomatoes to the cellar. Mended in the p.m. Russell has stomach trouble again, but is working. Mary Newhouse was here and also Sadie Wagner. Later, Lorna Harris came and gave me unwritten work. Sent in the stubs to Helen Nelson, Britt, Iowa. A letter from Anna. She has to go to the hospital again. Mary Newhouse and Sadie Wagner were friends. Libby's friend, Lorna Harris, was the grandmother of my Geringer cousins in Texas, David, Kim, and Carrie Geringer. Evidently, they had to prove they had done the lodge work by sending the stubs to someone. August 31st, 1946, Harold's 21st birthday. Had several here today. Mary R. brought a chicken. Marcia Sears and Stella were here in the a.m., and Hattie and Mrs. Bolts in the p.m. Some warmer. Russell saw Wilbur in town. Must have come since yesterday. Hattie brought ice cream in the evening. Libby's grandson, Harold or Stub Wade, was 21 years old today. He's on this side, and this is his brother, Bud, or Walter, as Libby calls him. Stub was a veteran who had returned home after the war. Several of Libby's friends gathered for a day of eating and probably sewing and visiting together. Wilbur Cray was the brother of Libby's son-in-law, Richard Cray. That is the end of the diary portion of the program for this week. I realized after I got done reading last week that I did not inform my listeners about Phyllis, Lanny, and Dick Hall. They were the family of Don Hall, a businessman uptown, and Perky Wade had just moved the family back to North English in one of his trucks. I'll have to do a feature on them someday. I also found a list of everybody who went to Marengo to present Marengo with the moon and stars from Libby's Rebecca Lodge on the night she thought it was too rainy to attend last week. There was many familiar names. Lena Wade, Doris Reese, Thelma Hahn, Gladys Bell, Lorna Harris, Mary Smith, Ruth Mall, Amy Plank, Jenny Wade, Evelyn Kurtz, Helen Geiger, Ruby Off, Lottie Bucher, Jean Mullen, Ione Johnson, Fern Holden, Marie Ayers, and Agatha Lucina. The acquisition of the week this week is something really small. It's from Michelle Williamson from Millersburg, the pastor of the Methodist churches in the area. She lives just south of the old school at the corner of Ballard and Washington Streets in Millersburg. She found this button from the Knights of Pythias. And as you can see it close up, you can still see some yellow and some blue on it. We researched, meaning Dave Jackson researched, and I followed along, about the fraternal organization called the Knights of Pythias. This organization from Millersburg joined into a new organization in North English in 1918, and the group was active until about 1942. We also have this scroll that hung in the F. Plank Seed Company and was owned by Dorothy Montross, with all the names of the Knights of Pythias who served in World War I. This is pretty cool. This hangs on the wall in the veterans room. I can get it so it's not got a glare on it here. Of course, you could come in here and see it if you'd like to see what it really looks like. And the names on it are J. McCombs, the grandfather of Sherry Stroman and her Bauslog siblings, L.B. Amick, the doctor at Millersburg, W.S. Baird, D.H. Carson, H.J. Jones, E.L. Kaufman, Charles H. Holderness, Elmer L. Kaufman, Charles H. Foster, who was the brother of Maud Claypool in the Diaries, Bert Morrison, Merle R. Smith, J.C. Humphreys, Roy Phelps, R.W. Geiger, Walter L. Longstreth, Samuel Burrow Long, who lost his 18-year-old bride to influenza while he was overseas, Herman Miller, and George Wine. Take this. Take that. The English Valleys History Center promotes the rich history of the communities within the river valleys of North, Middle, and South English rivers. It encompasses an area roughly served by the English Valley School District from Deep River to near Parnell and from Watcher to Kinross. This also includes the communities of North English, Millersburg, Webster, and South English. Please send donations to the English Valley's History Center, P.O. Box 70, North English, Iowa 52316. Our featured story this week is Lecil Miller. I will save the stories on Miller Hardware Store and the brick house just south of town for another day and concentrate today just on Lecil Miller. I found a quote from Carl Hogendorn about Lecil. Carl said, "We select this week 2 citizens who have a lifetime of doing for others without thought of glory or credit. The grand gal is Ellen Gerard, and the grand guy is Lecil Miller." Lecil Valentine Miller was born February 14, 1896, along with his twin, Cecil Valentine Miller. His siblings were Esther Miller Kirkpatrick, the grandmother of my friend Helen Kirkpatrick Schweetert from Colesburg, Iowa, and Lake Placid, Florida, and Esther Miller Carter, who was Mrs. Wayne Carter, and Louis or Dutch Miller, the grandfather of my friend and accountant Stephen Rose, and Nellie Smith Hohenschel. They were the children of Noah Samuel or Sam Miller and his wife Sarah or Rosie Schaff Miller. Sam was a farmer and businessman who opened Miller Hardware in 1920. In 1946, his son Lecil, who was a farmer for 27 years, and others, bought the hardware, which was in business until 1967. Lecil married Blanche Van Auken, whose brother Theodore Van Auken and sister Bernice Van Auken Giblin stayed in their home while attending high school. Lecil and Blanche had 2 sons, Lauren and Leland, with Leland eventually owning the hardware store. I remember Lecil when he was elderly and spent lots of time downtown. There is a picture taken by Ernie Dye of Lecil Miller on page 236, is this one up here, of the North English 150 yearbook, with Lecil dressed in overalls walking down the street with a bench full of elderly guys sitting up the street, which is exactly how I remember him. Lecil was a sports enthusiast, according to his obituary, when he died at 91 years old. He and his brother started to Willow Grove School, a country school south of town with 30 pupils in 1901. His brother Cecil died at age 16 after 2 appendix operations. His sister Nellie Hohenschel died at age 24 with 3 little children after her infant son, named Lecil Hohenschel, was stricken with polio. She was trying to care for him, neglecting herself, and she was stricken with peritonitis. And here's a picture of Lecil and Cecil from the North English Centennial book. There are the 2 together on this side, and his sisters Nellie and Esther, and the baby is Louis or Dutch Miller. And here's that 1908 Willow Grove school picture again that I showed last year that had the Brown boys in it. Lecil and Cecil are in the back row here, and you can't see them because it's so dark. Louis is over on this side, and the little girl down in front is the sister Ethel Miller Carter. And here's a picture of Lecil's 1908 Cadillac in the North English Centennial Parade in 1954. And we just found this picture last week on the Keokuk County Centennial site. And also from the North English Centennial book, here's a picture of Lecil with his wife Blanche and son Leland with wife Mildred at the Miller Hardware, and they're in their Centennial outfits. And of course, none of those people really had a beard in real life. According to Jess Mason, who wrote a letter to Carl Hogendorn, quote, "Lecil Miller left an unerasable mark. He was the friend of us kids and a helper when we needed help so badly. He never underplayed the athletes of North English, and they were his friends and his interest. Mace Brown worked for Lecil on the farm when he was struggling as a young baseball player, and Lecil made it possible for him to plow corn and dream about baseball at the same time. The class of 1926 made Lecil an honorary member." Lecil was also a member of the University of Iowa I Club from the 1920s to the 1980s, and he enjoyed local youth sports and activities. This morning I was talking to Russ Bucher about him, and he said a little known fact is that he took Little League players to from North English to games in Cedar Rapids. Lecil spent time, money, and energy preparing the fields for many years. He was responsible for the lighting of the South Ballpark Field, which was later named for him. After many years of support, he was given a lifetime pass to all English Valley school activities. And now here's a picture board that explains the Lecil Miller story. This is also another thing that you could come here to see if you'd like. There's a story down in this corner about the day that they named the field after him. There's one over here of his siblings and him. This one here. And then over on that side is him and his wife. And the rest of this we'll do another day about the story about the brick house. You can't even see that. It's clear at the top in the picture. The brick house south of town that the family owned. Now on to the correspondence. I heard from Mark Claypool. Jackie in the past, even though through rough times with disease and hard times, the folks always relied on one another. The true meaning of helping your neighbor, regardless of who you were. Another outstanding trip down memory lane. Thank you. Thank you, Jackie, for another amazing day of history. Marcia Wade Vincent from Lena, Illinois writes, saving my podcast for Monday's trip to Iowa. Then I feel like Jackie and I are carpooling. Pam Kavanaugh Shield says, thank you, Jackie, for the walk down memory lane. Was sad to hear of the loss of so many lives to the flu in 1918. Always interesting connecting my memory to so many North English names. Blessings to you for all the work you do to bring North English alive again. I was in contact with Lecil Miller's grandson, Gary Miller, for my story on the Miller family, and he said, thanks for promoting the community and its residents in your historical podcasts. I also heard from Pat Strasser Little, Barb Best Wright, Debbie Van D. Bombi, and from Alice Stramer. Vicki Holden Olson, one of the Smoky Row kids, remarked that she is having trouble seeing the pictures I show. We are hoping to get some more sophisticated computer equipment so I can show my pictures better. Right now we're running the whole show on my cell phone. I also saw Andy Weber at the Ghost Town presentation at the Watcher Opera House this week, and he talked about how his grandpa Roy Claypool was a prisoner of war in World War I. He said his grandpa told him that they ate what they were fed. It could have been rats. They were so hungry they didn't care. Cindy McCombs, one of my listeners from Oak Street, wanted to know exactly where Libby's house was located. It was just west of the corner of Oak Street at Southeast Street, and there are storage sheds there now. I would also like to mention that the next English Valley Alumni Luncheon at Bryant's in the Williamsburg Mall will be held at 11:30 a.m. on April 28th. Please contact Alice Stramer or Linda Carter for reservations. The 2025 programs are announced on the History Center site. They're all Sunday afternoon programs at 2, with the exception of the reunion, which will run all afternoon on Saturday, July 26th. There's a flyer of the English Valley Graduates page if you need to learn more information about when different decades of classes will meet during the alumni reunion on July 26th. The parade is at 10:30. Starting at noon, snacks and drinks will be available at the History Center, paid for by the sales from the Everyone at EV book for 2025, with pictures of all the graduates since 1957, which will be available after graduation this year. I will be doing a live broadcast before the parade at 9 a.m. and staying around after the parade to visit with alumni. We are also interested in learning about historical English Valley's items that you might wish to donate to the History Center. Also, please contact Dave Jackson or Scott Romine or any board member to donate. Also, I'm always looking for pictures. Right now I'm working on a story feature on the Smoky Row kids, so I need pictures of those people. I am working on a long piece about Bob Cobb. I need pictures from those. I need pictures for any of the businesses uptown. If you have anything inside of any of them, we're probably going to feature each and every one of them as time goes on. And thank you, everyone. It's been lovely to visit with you this morning, and we'll see you next week.
And that's a wrap.